I never told my wife that I secretly owned nearly half of her father's company, a stake worth over $20 billion. For 23 years, she believed I was nothing more than an ordinary consultant driving an old car and living in a small apartment. Then, one Tuesday, she invited me to dinner with her parents. I accepted, curious to see how they would treat a man they considered insignificant. The smiles were polite. The questions were cutting. And in the middle of the meal, her father slid a leather envelope across the table. That was the moment I realized this dinner had never truly been about family. Before this story takes an unexpected turn, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from? And have you ever been to a family dinner where you knew something others didn't? Let me know below. The text message arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October, and I knew exactly what it meant. I was 51 years old. I'd been married to Julia for 21 years, and in that time, I'd learned to read the temperature of her silence. This particular silence, the kind that came with her staring at her phone while her coffee went cold, meant her parents were planning something. Let me guess, I said from across our kitchen table in East Austin. Your mother. Julia looked up and slid her phone across the worn wooden table we'd bought at an estate sale 19 years ago. The message was brief, formal, and chilling. Dinner. Friday, 7 p.m. Important family matter. Mother. When my parents get this formal, Julia said quietly, someone usually gets hurt. She wasn't wrong. Evelyn Harrington didn't do casual. A dinner invitation via text instead of a phone call. That was a business transaction, not a family gathering. We're going, I said. Owen. I want to see what they're planning. What Julia didn't know, what she couldn't know, because I'd spent 14 months carefully not telling her, was that I'd been waiting for this moment. I'd seen it building in the small comments at Thanksgiving, in the way Douglas Harrington looked at me like I was a problem that needed solving, in the way our daughter Quinn had started treating me like an embarrassment. They thought they had all the power. They thought I was exactly what I appeared to be, a 51-year-old logistics consultant who drove a 9-year-old Honda and lived in a modest house in a gentrifying East Austin neighborhood. What they didn't know was this: 25 years ago, I'd inherited $500,000 from my grandfather, Robert Hartley. I bought stock in a struggling real estate development company run by Douglas Harrington, who was drowning in debt from the 2008 financial crisis. I'd studied that company for months. His fundamentals were solid. His projects were well-positioned. He just needed capital. So I started buying quietly through layers of corporate entities that couldn't be traced back to me. Within 3 years, I owned 15%. By the time I met Julia at a charity fundraiser, I owned 31%. By our wedding, 42%. Today, I owned 47% of Harrington Development Group. At current valuations, my position was worth approximately $20 billion. Douglas Harrington worked for me. He just didn't know it. Owen, Julia's voice pulled me back. Promise me you won't let them bully you. I reached across the table and took her hand. I promise they'll see exactly who I am. She squeezed my fingers, trusting me the way she'd trusted me for 21 years. When I'd asked her to live modestly, to build a life on something more than appearance, she'd never questioned it. When her mother had offered to help us buy a house in Westlake Hills, Julia had said no. When her father had suggested I could do better than consulting work, she'd defended me. She'd chosen me over their world, and she'd never once made me feel like it cost her anything. But it had cost her. I'd watched her parents withdraw their warmth year by year, watched them seat us at the far end of the table at holiday dinners, watched them introduce Julia with a slightly apologetic tone, as if her marriage to me was a mistake she'd eventually outgrow. For 14 months, I'd been testing them deliberately, driving the Honda when I could have bought anything, wearing off-the-rack shirts to their country club events, letting Douglas lecture me about business vision lectures about decisions I'd actually approved through my anonymous holdings. I'd wanted to know if they would ever see past the surface, if my own daughter would love me for who I was, rather than what I appeared to have. Julia picked up her phone, typing a response. I'm telling her we'll be there. Good. Outside our window, East Austin was waking up. Our neighborhood had changed since we'd moved here. Coffee shops had replaced auto repair shops. Our house, bought for $200,000 in 2004, was probably worth $450,000 now. We could have moved a dozen times over. Could have bought one of those Spanish colonial estates in Westlake Hills. Could have joined the country club. But Julia had never asked for any of that. And I had never offered. My grandfather had taught me something Douglas Harrington never learned, that the measure of a man isn't what he owns, but what he does with what he has. That wealth without wisdom is just numbers on a screen. Robert Hartley had built a company with Douglas 30 years ago. When Douglas started cutting corners and compromising integrity for profit, my grandfather walked away. The money he'd left me came with a letter I'd read so many times I could recite it from memory. If Douglas falls again, and he will help him, not because he deserves it, but because his family does, save his company. But more importantly, save his soul. I'd been following those instructions for 25 years. Julia stood up, coming around the table to kiss the top of my head. I love you. I love you too. What she didn't know was that every expansion Douglas credited to his brilliant leadership had been funded with my capital. The domain expansion he'd lectured me about last Thanksgiving, I'd approved that funding. The downtown Congress Avenue tower, my investment made it possible. The disaster recovery after the floods, I'd quietly bought distressed properties and held them. Douglas Harrington had spent 21 years treating me like a failure, and I'd spent 25 years making sure his company succeeded despite him. Friday would bring the confrontation I'd been preparing for, and this time I wouldn't stay silent. Friday evening arrived with the kind of October heat that makes Texas unforgiving even as autumn settles in. I drove our Honda through East Austin. As twilight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Julia silent beside me, her hand resting on the center console where I could reach it. We'd made this drive before dozens of times, over 21 years, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like crossing a border into enemy territory. Holly Street slipped past the windows. Small houses with chain-link fences, kids playing basketball in driveways, the taco truck on the corner doing brisk business. Our neighbors were teachers and musicians, city workers and small business owners. People who measured wealth in Friday night barbecues and Little League games, not square footage and stock portfolios. We don't have to do this, Julia said softly. I glanced at her. In the fading light, she looked exactly as she had the night I'd met her 23 years ago at that museum fundraiser. Dark hair, kind eyes, a smile that had made me forget every careful plan I'd ever made. She'd been wearing a simple black dress while the other women wore designer gowns. That's how I'd known she was different. Yes, we do, I said, taking her hand. We turned onto Mopac and the world began to change. The highway carried us north through Austin's heart, past the university, where I'd taught evening logistics classes for extra money in our early years, past the office parks where I still maintained my consulting practice. Traffic was light for a Friday evening. Most people were heading downtown for dinner and drinks, not toward the hills where old money lived behind stone walls and perfect lawns. As we climbed toward Westlake, the houses grew larger. Not gradually, that would have been honest. Instead, there was a clear line where modest became extravagant, where lived-in became showcased. Chain-link fences gave way to wrought iron. Front porches gave way to circular drives. Grass became grounds. Julia's hand tightened on mine. I used to think this was normal, she said, looking out at the estates rolling past. Growing up here, I thought everyone lived like this. When did you realize they didn't? The first time I came to your apartment. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. Gee, that studio near campus with the window air conditioner and the hot plate. You made me spaghetti. I'd never been so happy. Your mother almost had a stroke when you told her we were dating. She had 2 strokes when I told her we were engaged. Julia turned to face me. She pulled me aside at the engagement party and asked if I was pregnant. Like that was the only possible explanation for why I'd choose you. The memory still stung, even after all these years. Evelyn Harrington had smiled at me that entire evening while plotting ways to end the engagement. She'd offered Julia a trip to Europe 6 months away to clear her head. She'd suggested I might be more comfortable pursuing someone from my own background. She'd even intimated that a small payment might help me see reason. I'd refused every offer, and Julia had married me anyway. We exited Mopac onto Loop 360, and suddenly we were in Westlake proper. This wasn't just wealthy. This was generational wealth, the kind that came with country club memberships passed down like heirlooms and property taxes that exceeded most people's annual salaries. Valley Ridge Drive, Julia said as I turned onto her parents' street. Her voice had gone flat. The Harrington estate sat on 4 acres at the end of a cul-de-sac, positioned to overlook the hill country, like a fortress surveying its domain. Spanish colonial architecture, white stucco walls, red tile roof, arched windows that probably cost more than our entire house. The kind of place that appeared in Austin Home magazine with titles like Classic Elegance or Timeless Grace. I pulled into the circular driveway, parking behind a Mercedes and a Lexus. Through our windshield, the house looked more like a museum than a home. Every window glowed with warm light, but there was nothing welcoming about it. Owen. Julia turned to me and I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Promise me you won't let them bully you. I promise they'll see exactly who I am, I said, echoing my words from Tuesday morning. But this time I meant something different. This time I meant all of me. We sat for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, the Texas heat pressing down even as the sun disappeared. I thought about the letter in my jacket pocket at home, my grandfather's letter, the one that had guided 25 years of my life, the one that would change everything tonight if I chose to share it. Ready? I asked. Julia nodded, but her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. We walked up the stone pathway together, past the perfectly manicured lawn that probably required a team of gardeners, past the fountain that burbled expensively, past the carefully curated landscape lighting that made everything look like a stage set. I rang the doorbell. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see movement, but when the door opened, it wasn't Douglas or Evelyn who greeted us. Carmen stood in the doorway, the housekeeper, not family. Her face was professionally neutral, but I'd known her long enough to recognize the apology in her eyes. She'd worked for the Harringtons for 15 years. She'd seen everything. Mr. Hartley, Mrs. Hartley, she said formally, stepping aside. Please come in. I looked past her into the foyer. Marble floors. A chandelier that probably cost 6 figures. Fresh flowers in a vase that I recognized from the home tour Julia's mother had given us years ago. Waterford crystal naturally. But no Douglas. No Evelyn. No Quinn. Just Carmen in her uniform, taking our coats as if we were clients arriving for an appointment. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a business transaction, and I'd just walked into the opening act of whatever they had planned. Douglas appeared in the foyer before Carmen could finish stepping aside. 70 years old, and still carrying himself like a man who'd built empires, which I supposed he believed he had. He wore a navy blazer over an open-collar shirt, the kind of effortless expensive that came from personal shoppers and unlimited budgets. His silver hair was perfectly trimmed. His tan spoke of golf courses and boat clubs. "Owen," he said, extending his hand. The handshake was designed to dominate. He gripped too hard, held too long, his thumb pressing against the back of my hand in that alpha male way some men never outgrow. His eyes locked on mine, searching for the flinch he expected. I gave him nothing, just met his gaze steadily and waited for him to release first. He did, but not before a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Julia, sweetheart." His voice transformed completely as he turned to his daughter, warm and affectionate in a way it had never been with me. He kissed her cheek, held her shoulders, looked at her with something approaching genuine love. That was the thing about Douglas Harrington. He wasn't a monster. He was a father who believed he was protecting his daughter from a mistake. That made him more dangerous than any villain. "Where's Mother?" Julia asked. "Living room. You know how she is about entrances." He led us through the foyer, past the sweeping staircase and the gallery of family photographs that documented generations of Harrington's success. Julia at her debutante ball. Julia graduating from Texas. Julia at her wedding, though notably that particular photo was smaller than the others and positioned where visitors might easily miss it. Evelyn rose from a leather wingback chair as we entered the living room. 67 years old and elegant in the way that required hours of daily maintenance, yoga facials, whatever procedures women of her generation and tax bracket used to hold time at bay. She wore cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse. Pearls, of course. Always pearls. "Darling," she said to Julia, embracing her with the kind of careful hug that avoided disturbing makeup or wrinkles. Then she turned to me. "Owen." One word delivered with a smile that never touched her eyes. She leaned in for an air kiss, her lips passing somewhere near my cheek, without actually making contact. Her perfume was expensive and overwhelming. Chanel, probably something that cost more per ounce than most people spent on groceries. "Evelyn," I replied, matching her tone exactly. "Thank you for having us." "Of course. Family is everything." The word family came out with just enough emphasis to make it clear I was something separate from that category. A voice from the corner made me turn. "Oh. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad." Quinn was sprawled on the sofa, thumbs moving across her phone screen. 18 years old, blonde hair pulled into a careless ponytail, wearing designer jeans that probably cost $400, but were artfully torn to look casual. She didn't look up from whatever social media crisis demanded her attention. "Quinn," Julia said, her voice soft with hope. "Put the phone down, honey." "In a second." The second never came. Quinn kept scrolling, kept typing, kept existing in whatever digital world she'd disappeared into. This was new, or rather, this was worse. There'd been a time when Quinn looked up when her parents entered a room. There'd been a time when she smiled. "Shall we?" Douglas gestured toward the dining room with the confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The dining room was everything I'd expected. Long mahogany table that could seat 12, but was set for 5. Crystal chandelier overhead, the kind that required someone to climb a ladder and clean each individual piece. Windows overlooking the back terrace and pool, strategically lit to showcase the hill country view beyond. And the seating arrangement, oh, the seating arrangement was perfect. Douglas at the head of the table naturally. The seat of power, the position of judgment. Evelyn to his right, close enough to murmur strategic observations. Quinn beside her grandmother, already aligned with the program, even if she didn't realize it yet. Julia and I were directed to the opposite side, physically separated from the family unit, outnumbered 3-2. Positioned, so we had to look up the length of the table to meet Douglas's eyes. It was courtroom seating. Defendant and counsel on one side, prosecution on the other, judge presiding. The table itself was set with enough crystal and china to fund a semester of college. Multiple glasses per person, water, wine, something else I didn't recognize. Charger plates that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. Linen napkins folded into perfect shapes. a floral centerpiece that looked professionally arranged. This wasn't dinner. This was theater. Carmen appeared with a wine bottle pouring for Douglas first, then Evelyn working her way around the table with practiced efficiency. When she reached me, I caught her eye and saw the warning there. She'd worked in this house long enough to recognize when something was building. Douglas lifted his wine glass. The crystal caught the chandelier light, refracting it into tiny rainbows that danced across the white tablecloth. "Before we begin," he said, his voice carrying the weight of prepared remarks, "I want to propose a toast." He looked at Julia, then at me, then back to Julia. "To family," he said, "on the bonds that define us, the legacy we protect, the future we secure." Every word was chosen deliberately, every pause calculated. Julia raised her glass hesitantly. Quinn glanced up from her phone just long enough to lift hers. Evelyn's smile was serene, the expression of someone who knew exactly how the evening would unfold. I raised my glass and said nothing. "Should to family," they echoed. The word felt like a threat. And as we drank, I realized this dinner had never truly been about family at all. The first course arrived with studied elegance that made eating feel like work. Carmen placed delicate plates before each of us, seared scallops with microgreens and sauce dots that probably had a French name. Food designed to impress rather than satisfy. Douglas cut into his scallop with surgical precision. "We just finalized the domain expansion project," he said, as if continuing a conversation we'd all been part of. 10-year development, $2.3 billion in total investment. Takes real vision to see opportunities like that. He said it the way professors explain basic concepts to struggling students. I approved that funding, I thought. Every single dollar came from my holdings. You're lecturing me about a project I greenlit 18 months ago. But I just nodded and said, "Sounds ambitious." The word seemed to disappoint him. He'd wanted engagement, maybe argument. Instead, I gave him nothing. "It's the largest mixed-use development in Central Texas," he continued. "Your father understands real estate, Julia. Built this company from nothing." From nothing. The lie was so smooth he probably believed it himself. Evelyn picked up the thread as smoothly as a relay runner taking the baton. "Julia, did I mention I ran into Preston Chambers last week?" Julia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "He's doing remarkably well." Evelyn continued, her voice light and casual. "Just bought a place in River Oaks. Absolutely stunning property. 4 acres. The garden alone is something out of Architectural Digest." "I'm happy for Preston," Julia said carefully. "He asked about you, of course." Evelyn's smile could have cut glass. "He's still single, you know. Still building that portfolio. Some people really do make the most of their potential." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Across the table, Quinn finally looked up from her phone. "Grandfather's given me real responsibilities now," she said, and I couldn't tell if she was talking to me or through me. "I'm coordinating with the development team on the domain integration. Real work. Strategic planning. Not just consulting." She said consulting, like it was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "That's wonderful, honey," Julia said, trying to catch our daughter's eye. But Quinn was looking at me now, really looking at me for the first time all evening. "Some of us are actually building careers, you know. Real careers with real companies, not just shuffling papers and calling it strategy." The contempt in her voice was pure Harrington. "Quinn." Julia's voice had an edge. I recognized the one that came out when she was defending me to her family for the 1,000th time. "What, I'm just being honest?" Quinn shrugged with the casual cruelty only teenagers and the very wealthy can achieve. "Don't you ever wish you'd made different choices, Mom?" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Don't you ever wonder what life would be like if you'd married someone with actual ambition? Quinn continued, her eyes locked on mine. Someone who wanted to build something. Someone who wouldn't embarrass you at country club events. Julia's hand trembled as she set down her fork. That's your father you're talking about. I know who he is, Quinn said. And the way she said it, flat, final, dismissive, hurt more than anything her grandparents had ever done. Because they were supposed to look down on me. But Quinn, she was supposed to be different. She was supposed to see past the surface to the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd helped with her algebra homework, who'd sat through every school play and volleyball game. Instead, she'd become exactly like them. The main course arrived beef preparation that probably cost more per ounce than I spent on groceries in a week. Carmen moved around the table silently, her face carefully neutral, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. The point is, Douglas said, as if Quinn's outburst had been part of natural conversation, success requires a certain mindset, a willingness to take risks, to operate at a level most people simply can't reach. Every expansion you credit to your leadership was funded with capital you didn't know you had. Every tower with your name exists because I made it possible. You've been operating on my money for 25 years while lecturing me about ambition. But I stayed perfectly still, which I could see infuriated them more than any response. Evelyn turned to Julia with practiced sympathy. Darling, we can't watch you struggle financially because of pride. There are resources available. Opportunities. Preston, for instance, mentioned he's looking for a director of... I'm not struggling, Mother, Julia said, but her voice cracked. Of course not, darling. Of course not. The words dripped with pity. They were circling like sharks now, each comment carefully calibrated to remind me I didn't belong, that I'd never belong, that the best thing I could do for everyone was simply disappear. Dessert came and went, some elaborate chocolate construction with gold leaf. Coffee was poured. Quinn had gone back to her phone, her work apparently done. Douglas and Evelyn exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that comes from decades of marriage and shared purpose. Then Douglas cleared his throat. The sound silenced the table more effectively than any shout. He reached beneath his chair, movements deliberate, theatrical. When his hand emerged, it held a leather folder, expensive, substantial, the kind lawyers use for important documents. He placed it on the table between the coffee cups and dessert plates with a soft thud that might as well have been a gunshot. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Julia's hand found mine under the table, her fingers cold and trembling. Douglas looked at me with an expression I'd seen before in boardrooms and negotiation tables. The expression of a man who believed he'd already won, who was simply waiting for his opponent to acknowledge defeat. Owen, he said, and for the first time all evening his voice carried something other than condescension. It carried finality. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your future with this family. The leather folder sat between us like a coiled snake, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was inside it would change everything. The leather folder landed on the table between wine glasses and crystal with a soft thud that silenced the room. Douglas slid it toward me with the confidence of a man who had closed 1,000 deals, who had negotiated contracts worth billions, who believed he understood exactly how power worked. Go ahead, he said. Open it. I didn't move. Just looked at him across the mahogany expanse, at the satisfaction in his eyes, at the careful neutrality of Evelyn's expression, at Quinn's studied indifference as she pretended to scroll through her phone while watching everything. Owen. Julia's voice was barely a whisper. I opened the folder. Inside, stapled with $500 an hour legal precision, lay an annulment agreement. 20 pages of whereas clauses and party of the first part language that all boiled down to one simple proposition. My marriage had been a mistake, and mistakes could be corrected for the right price. Clipped to the front was a check for $275,000. The number felt arbitrary until I did the math. At $40,000 a year, what they probably assumed a consultant made it represented nearly 7 years of income. Enough to start over. Enough to disappear. Enough to make everyone's problem go away. Owen, Douglas said, leaning back in his chair like a judge about to deliver a verdict. I'll be direct. You married above your station. That's not an insult, it's a fact. Julia could have had anyone. She could have had Preston Chambers. We tried to accept this marriage. God knows we tried. But we can't stand by and watch our daughter struggle financially because of pride. We're not struggling, Julia started. Sweetheart. Evelyn's voice was gentle, pitying. You live in East Austin. You drive a car that's nearly 10 years old. You haven't taken a real vacation in how long we can't pretend this is the life we wanted for you. This solves everything. Douglas continued, tapping the check with one manicured finger. That's more than you'd make in 7 years as a consultant, Owen. Sign the annulment, take the money, and move on. You'll be better off, and Julia can return to a life suited to her background, to her potential. The silence that followed pressed against my ears like physical weight. Then Julia stood so fast, her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You can't buy people. You can't just, Julia, sit down. Douglas's voice carried the weight of decades of command, of a man accustomed to being obeyed by everyone from CEOs to waitstaff. The adults are talking. I'm 46 years old, Dad. Her voice cracked. My husband is sitting right here while you're trying to... But he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me, certain he'd already won, certain that every man had his price, and mine was written on that check. Then Quinn spoke. Mom. Her voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes before earthquakes and hurricanes and moments that split your life into before and after. Julia turned toward our daughter, disbelief warring with hope on her face. Quinn... Grandmother's right. Quinn set down her phone, giving us her full attention for the first time all evening. You deserve better than this. Better than him. The words landed like bullets. Quinn, don't, Julia whispered. But our daughter wasn't finished. She looked directly at me, 18 years old, and absolutely certain of her judgment. Dad, be honest. You're holding Mom back. Everyone can see it. You live in that tiny house. You drive that embarrassing car. All my friends' parents have lake houses and boats, and she stopped, recalibrated. You're not good enough for her. You never were. She said it like a simple truth, like commenting on the weather or stating the obvious. No malice, no anger, just cold assessment. Quinn, Julia cried. That's your father. I know who he is, Mom. Quinn turned to her mother, and her voice softened slightly, became almost gentle. I love you, and I want you to be happy. But Dad's not making you happy. He's making you settle. She gestured at the check. Take the money and go, Dad. You'd be doing everyone a favor. Mom could be with someone like Preston. Someone with a real future. Someone who wouldn't make her choose between her family and her marriage. Someone who wouldn't embarrass her. The word embarrass hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Julia broke, then crying the way people do when something inside finally shatters beyond repair. Her hands covered her face. Her shoulders shook, and I wanted to reach for her but couldn't seem to move. Because I'd known this moment was coming. I'd been preparing for it for 14 months, but knowing isn't the same as living it. Knowing isn't the same as watching your daughter measure your worth and discard you. Watching your wife's parents treat your marriage like a failed business venture that needed liquidation. I had loved Julia without conditions. I had loved her through lean years and quiet victories, believing respect grew from patience. I'd swallowed every slight from her parents, every smile that weighed my income before my character. I'd thought time would soften them. I'd thought my daughter saw more, but in that moment I understood how neatly money edits a story, how easily comfort masquerades as wisdom. They weren't offering a choice. They were erasing me. And the cruelest part wasn't the check. It was realizing that love measured in numbers had already been declared insufficient. Douglas watched my silence with satisfaction. Evelyn's expression remained carefully neutral, but there was triumph in her eyes. Quinn had gone back to her phone, her contribution apparently complete. Only Julia was crying. Only Julia seemed to understand what had just happened. I picked up the check and examined it, letting them believe I was tempted, letting them believe they'd won. "That's generous," I said quietly. Douglas smiled. Actually smiled. I set the check down carefully and took out my phone. "Before I respond," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building under my skin, "I need to make a quick call." Douglas frowned. "What does your attorney have to do with this?" I looked at him carefully. Really looked at him. At the man who'd spent 25 years accepting my money while dismissing my worth. At the woman who'd raised a daughter to value status over character. At the granddaughter they'd poisoned against me. "Everything," I said. Then I dialed Julian Rhodes, the attorney, who had managed my interests for 25 years, and placed the phone on speaker in the center of the table. The dial tone echoed in the sudden silence like a countdown, and I watched as their certainty began very slowly to crack. Douglas stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the floor. "What do you think you're doing?" I kept my eyes on my phone, scrolling calmly through my contacts. "I told you. Making a call." "Put that away. We're in the middle of a conversation." "No, Douglas. We're at the end of one." I found Julian's number and tapped it. "You made your offer. Now I'm making mine." The room went silent except for the ringing through the speaker. Once, twice, 3 times. Julian Rhodes answered on the 4th ring. "Owen, everything all right?" "Julian, sorry to call so late. I'm at dinner with the Harringtons, and we've hit a complication. Could you pull up the Hartley Holdings file? I need you to walk everyone through the ownership structure." A pause. The full structure. Everything. Start with Harrington Development. Douglas had gone pale, one hand gripping the table. Evelyn looked confused, glancing between us. "All right," Julian said, his voice filling the room through the speaker. "Harrington Development Group. Total valuation approximately $20 billion. 100 million shares outstanding." Evelyn inhaled sharply. 20 billion, Douglas, I thought. "Let him finish," I said quietly. Primary shareholder Hartley Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware in 1999, owns 47 million shares, 47% of outstanding equity. "That's impossible," Douglas whispered. But his voice carried no conviction. Secondary shareholder Douglas Harrington Personal Holdings, 18 million shares, 18%. 18. Evelyn turned to her husband. "You told me you owned the majority." "Remaining 35%, Julian continued, "distributed among various institutional investors, family trusts, and public shareholders." Quinn's voice cut through. "Wait. Who owns Hartley Holdings?" "Hartley Holdings LLC is a single-member company," Julian said. "Sole owner Owen Hartley has been the majority shareholder of Harrington Development Group since 2008. The silence that followed was absolute. Douglas sank back into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. "Thank you, Julian," I said. "Can you confirm the timeline?" Initial investment March 2008 during the financial crisis. Purchased distressed shares at 32 cents on the dollar. Initial stake 15%. Douglas closed his eyes. He was remembering now. The crisis. The banks calling loans. The mysterious investor who'd appeared with cash. Additional purchases occurred over 16 years. 15% became 31% in 2010. 31 became 42% in 2012 following the Continental Properties acquisition funded entirely by Hartley Holdings. 42 became 47% in 2018. Every expansion, I said, looking directly at Douglas. Every acquisition. Every time you needed capital, and the bank said no, I said yes. The Domain Project. That was me. The downtown tower me. The flood recovery in 2015 me. I was never a mysterious investor, Douglas. I was your son-in-law. Evelyn's hand went to her throat. But you're a logistics consultant. You drive a 15-year-old Honda Accord. I finished. I know. I also own nearly half of a $20 billion company. Both things are true. Julia was crying silently beside me, but she wasn't letting go of my hand. Quinn stared at me. You've been rich this whole time. While we've been living in that tiny apartment. Living within our means. I said gently. Living honestly. Building a life based on what we earn, not what I inherited. Your mother knows about the money, Quinn. She's always known. She chose this life with me. I chose you, Julia said, her voice thick with tears. I chose us. I chose real over impressive every single day for 21 years. Douglas finally spoke, his voice hollow. The board meetings, the votes on major decisions. You've been approving everything. You've been letting me think I was in charge. You were in charge, I said. Of operations. Of day-to-day decisions. You're good at that, Douglas. You're a talented businessman when you're not busy measuring your worth against everyone else's. But you could have fired me. Taken over. Yes, I could have, but that was never the point. I leaned forward. My grandfather left me money with one instruction: save your company and save you from yourself. He was your father's partner, Douglas, Robert Hartley. You remember him. The color drained from Douglas's face. Robert, but he died 25 years ago. He left me a letter, instructions. If Douglas falls again, catch him, but make sure he learns something first. I pulled a folded envelope from my jacket. You were falling, Douglas. Gambling, bad investments. Desperate enough to try selling the company to Preston Chambers without the approval of the majority shareholder. Which is me. Evelyn gasped. Julian, I said into the phone. Is there anything else they need to know? Just one thing. Any sale or transfer of more than 10% requires majority shareholder approval. That would be you, Owen. Crystal clear. Thanks, Julian. Good luck, he said, and disconnected. I looked around the table at Douglas shattered, at Evelyn struggling to process, at Quinn, her worldview crumbling, at Julia still holding my hand. So here's where we are, I said quietly. You offered me $275,000 to leave my wife. That's roughly 7 years of my consultant salary. It's also about 3 hours of dividend income from my Harrington Development holdings. I stood, helping Julia to her feet. I don't want your money. I never did. I wanted a family. I wanted to be accepted for who I am, not what I own. Quinn made a small, broken sound. But tonight you've shown me exactly what you value, and it's not family. It's control. It's status. I picked up the torn check. I'm keeping this, as a reminder of what I won't accept anymore. Julia moved toward the door. I followed, then paused. There's a board meeting Monday morning at 9. I suggest you attend, Douglas. We're going to discuss some changes in leadership. And Quinn, your position at Harrington Development is terminated effective immediately. Not as punishment, as education. Learn what it means to build something yourself. We walked out into the warm Texas night. Julia leaned against me in the driveway, shaking. That was terrifying. I know. That was necessary. I know that too. We got in my 15-year-old Accord and drove back to East Austin, where our 800-square-foot house waited with its honest foundation. Behind us, the reckoning had begun. I stayed standing, looking down at the man who had dismissed me for 21 years. Douglas's face had gone from shock to confusion to something approaching fear. Evelyn sat frozen, one hand pressed against her chest, as if checking her own heartbeat. Quinn's phone lay forgotten on the table. Only Julia moved, reaching for my hand, but I was too far away now physically and in every other way that mattered. 25 years ago. I began my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Your company was collapsing, Douglas. The financial crisis destroyed you. Every bank had looked at your books and walked away. No one would touch Harrington Development. He tried to speak. No words came out. I was 26 years old. I'd just inherited $500,000 from my grandfather, Robert Hartley. Most people would have bought a car or taken a vacation. I studied your business for 6 months. Your fundamentals were solid. Your project pipeline was strong. You just needed capital. So I bought in. I pulled out my own phone, opened the documentation Julian had sent years ago, and slid it across the table. Incorporation papers, stock certificates, a paper trail that couldn't be denied. Within 3 years, I owned 15%. By the time I met Julia at that museum fundraiser, I owned 31%. I looked at my wife, saw the shock, and something else, maybe understanding, maybe betrayal in her eyes. By our wedding day, 42%. Today, 47%. This is impossible, Douglas whispered. Hartley Holdings is institutional. You thought it was a pension fund or investment firm. You never asked, because the money always arrived when you needed it. When you wanted to expand into the domain, the capital appeared. When you nearly lost everything in the floods, someone quietly bought those distressed properties and held them until you could redevelop. When you needed financing for that Congress Avenue tower, the funds materialized. I let each revelation land like a blow. That was all me, Douglas. Every expansion you've taken credit for. Every success you've celebrated at your country club. Every time you've lectured me about vision and business acumen, you've been describing decisions I approved, projects I funded, risks I underwrote. The silence was absolute. You work for me, Douglas. You just didn't know it. Evelyn made a sound, half gasp, half sob. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time, and there was nothing she could do but watch. I turned to Quinn, my daughter, 18 years old and so certain of her judgments, so confident in her dismissals. She looked small now, younger than her years, and part of me wanted to take it all back, to protect her from this moment. But she'd made her choice. She'd weighed her father in the balance and found him wanting. Now she would learn what that scale actually measured. Quinn, I said gently, I wanted to know whether my daughter valued character or wealth, whether you loved me for who I am or for what you believed I lacked. Her face had gone pale. Dad, I didn't. Tonight I have my answer. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but there was no taking them back now. Your position at Harrington Development is terminated effective immediately. Perhaps it's time you learned what a real career requires. What it means to build something without a safety net. To be judged on your merit rather than your last name. Daddy, please. The word she hadn't used since she was 12. But it was too late for that now. I picked up the torn check, held it so they could all see it. I never wanted your money, Douglas. I never wanted your approval or your country club memberships or your social status. I wanted to love your daughter without caring about bank accounts and property values. I wanted to be part of a family that measured worth in character rather than credit scores. I dropped the check pieces onto the table like ashes. But you only saw someone you believed was beneath you. Someone whose 7-year-old Honda was an embarrassment. Whose modest house in East Austin was evidence of failure. You never asked why I lived that way. You never considered that it might be a choice. Douglas found his voice raw and desperate. This is my company. I built it. No. The word cut through his protest like a knife. You drove it to bankruptcy. I saved it. While you sat in boardrooms taking credit, I was the one ensuring those deals closed. While you lectured me about ambition, I was protecting the legacy my grandfather left behind. I looked around the table at each of them. I've called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. The agenda is simple, a vote on the CEO position. You'll be removed, Douglas. Professional management will be installed. People who understand that a company is more than one man's ego. You can't do this. His voice broke. This is everything I am. Then perhaps, I said quietly, it's time you became something else. I turned to Julia. She was crying, but when I held out my hand, she took it without hesitation. That's what 21 years meant. That's what real marriage looked like. We have a long drive home, I said. She stood still, holding my hand, and together we walked toward the door. Behind us, the Harrington family sat amid the ruins of everything they'd believed. Douglas staring at documents that proved his empire belonged to someone else. Evelyn watching her carefully ordered world collapse. Quinn realizing that the father she'd dismissed held all the power she'd thought belonged to her grandfather. And for the first time in 21 years, they finally saw me clearly. Not as the son-in-law who wasn't good enough, but as the man who'd been in control all along. Douglas started to stand, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. This is my... Sit down, I said quietly. I'm not finished. The command in my voice surprised even me. This wasn't the Owen Hartley who'd sat silently through 1,000 condescending dinners. This was someone else. Someone who'd been waiting 25 years for this moment. Douglas sank back into his chair. You see, Douglas, I didn't just invest in your company. I've been watching you, protecting it from your decisions. And for the past 18 months, I've been watching you try to destroy everything my grandfather and I built. I pulled a manila envelope from my jacket, documents I'd asked Julian to prepare weeks ago when I'd first suspected what Douglas was planning. I know about Preston Chambers, I said, sliding the papers across the table. I know about the secret merger negotiations. Evelyn's head snapped toward her husband. What merger? Douglas's face went from red to white in seconds. These are emails. I continued tapping the documents. Communications between your attorney and Preston's legal team. Negotiations that started 8 months ago. You've been planning to sell Harrington Development without the board's knowledge. Without my knowledge. That's not... Douglas started. Preston has already acquired 15% from smaller shareholders, I interrupted. Quietly over the past year. Your plan was to sell him your 18%, giving him 33% total, then recommend the board approve a full acquisition. Julia made a small sound. Even she hadn't known this was coming. The price was $10 billion, I said, of which you'd receive $3 billion for your stake. That's what tonight was really about, wasn't it? You needed me gone. You needed Julia unmarried and back under your control. Because if I contested the sale, which I absolutely would have, the whole deal would collapse. Douglas's hands were shaking now. You don't understand. The company needs nothing. My voice was ice. But you do. You need $3 billion desperately. Because you've lost over $200 million in the past 3 years. Evelyn stood up so fast her chair fell backward. What? Bad investments? I said, pulling out another set of documents. Bank statements, trading records, casino receipts. High-stakes gambling in Vegas. Cryptocurrency disasters. You bought Bitcoin at 60,000 and sold at 20. Commercial real estate speculation in markets you didn't understand. Private equity deals that went south. Douglas, Evelyn whispered, her voice strangled. Tell me this isn't true. But her husband couldn't meet her eyes. The Westlake house has a $3 million second mortgage. I continued relentlessly. The company expenses you've been claiming. Half of them are covering personal losses. You've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years, and it's finally caught up with you. Quinn was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched her grandfather, her hero, the man she'd modeled her ambitions after, crumble before her eyes. So tonight wasn't about family, I said. It wasn't about protecting Julia or giving me a fresh start. It was about desperation. You needed me gone so Preston's deal could proceed cleanly. No complications. No questions from the majority shareholder about why the CEO is suddenly eager to sell a profitable company. Douglas's voice came out as a croak. I built this company. I deserve. You built it on my grandfather's foundation and my capital, I said. And you've spent the past 3 years gambling it away. The only reason Harrington Development still exists is because I've been protecting it. From you. The room felt airless. Evelyn had one hand pressed against the wall, steadying herself. Julia was staring at her father like she'd never seen him before. Quinn had gone pale, all her earlier contempt transformed into shock. Preston knows, by the way, I added. His due diligence team discovered my holdings 6 months ago. That's why the deal has been stalling. He realized you were trying to sell him a company you don't actually control. No, Douglas whispered. No, he said. He said what you wanted to hear. Because Preston Chambers is a businessman, and watching you squirm was entertaining. But he's not stupid enough to complete a fraud. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Fraud. Evelyn repeated, her voice hollow. What else would you call it? Selling something you don't own. Misrepresenting ownership structure. Concealing the majority stakeholder's existence. Douglas's face had gone gray. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. This was the end of everything he'd built his identity on. The successful CEO, the real estate mogul, the man who'd transformed a small development company into a billion-dollar empire. All of it was a lie. And now everyone knew. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then the doorbell rang. We all froze. Carmen appeared in the dining room doorway, her expression confused and apologetic. Mr. Harrington, she said softly, addressing Douglas. Mr. Preston Chambers is here. He says you invited him for 8:30 to finalize the paperwork. Douglas's face went from gray to green, and I smiled, because this was about to get very interesting. Preston Chambers walked into the dining room like a man entering a boardroom he already owned. Tailored charcoal suit that probably cost $5,000, confident stride. the kind of smile that said he was used to winning and expected tonight to be no different. Then he read the room. His smile faded as his eyes swept across the scene, torn check scattered on the mahogany table, Evelyn gripping the wall for support. Douglas gray-faced and trembling, Quinn crying silently, Julia holding my hand like a lifeline. The wreckage of what was supposed to be a simple family dinner. "Douglas," he said, his voice losing its easy confidence, "you invited me to finalize the merger paperwork, but I think I'm interrupting something." "Mr. Chambers," I turned to face him fully. "I'm Owen Hartley. We haven't formally met, but I believe you know exactly who I am." Preston's expression shifted. Recognition, then resignation, then something that might have been respect. "I've known for 6 months," he admitted, addressing me directly now, not Douglas. "My due diligence team is very thorough. They discovered Hartley Holdings' position in March. 47% ownership. That's when I realized any deal would require your approval, not Douglas's." Douglas made a sound like a wounded animal. "You said," he started, but Preston cut him off with a look. "I said what you wanted to hear, Douglas, because I was curious how far you'd go, how deep the deception ran." Preston's voice was cool, professional, but there was an edge of contempt beneath it. "You tried to sell me a company you don't control. You misrepresented the ownership structure. You concealed the existence of the majority shareholder." He let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "That's not just bad business, Douglas. That's fraud, and I don't do business with frauds." The word echoed in the silence. Evelyn made a choking sound. Quinn's crying intensified. Julia squeezed my hand tighter. Preston turned back to me. "Mr. Hartley, I owe you an apology. When my team discovered your holdings, I should have reached out directly. Instead, I let this," he gestured at the chaos around us, "play out. That was unprofessional of me." "You were protecting your interests," I said. "I understand that." "Still." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, offered it to me. "If you ever consider selling, or if you want to discuss legitimate partnership opportunities, I'd be honored to talk. You've built something impressive here, even if the man taking credit didn't realize it." I took the card, nodded. Preston walked toward the door, then paused. He looked at Julia, really looked at her with something that might have been genuine regret. "Julia," he said softly, "I'm sorry you were used as leverage in this. Your parents—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "You deserve better than being treated like a pawn in someone else's game." Julia's voice was barely a whisper. "We went to school together, Preston. I remember. You were always kind, always genuine." He glanced at me, then back to her. "I'm glad you found someone who sees that, who values it." With that, he walked out. Carmen appeared to show him to the door, and a moment later we heard it close with a quiet finality that sounded like a coffin being sealed. The silence in the dining room was absolute. Douglas sat slumped in his chair, looking 20 years older than he had an hour ago. His empire, the one he'd thought he controlled, the one he'd planned to sell to cover his gambling debts, had just walked out the door. And everyone in his family now knew the truth. He was a fraud who'd been living on borrowed money and borrowed time. Evelyn had slid down the wall into a sitting position on the floor, her expensive slacks pooling around her, her perfect hair disheveled. She was crying silently, shoulders shaking. This woman who'd spent decades maintaining appearances had just watched her entire world collapse in front of a stranger. Quinn had her face in her hands, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The grandfather she'd idolized, the man she'd used as a template for success, had been revealed as a desperate gambler willing to commit fraud. Julia stood beside me, still holding my hand, tears streaming down her face, but whether from relief or grief or some combination of both, I couldn't tell. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt satisfied watching them face the consequences of their contempt, their cruelty, their assumption that money equaled worth. But I didn't. I just felt tired. And I wasn't done yet. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope yellowed with age sealed 25 years ago, with wax that had long since cracked. My grandfather's handwriting on the front faded but still legible to be opened when Douglas falls again. Before I leave, I said, my voice quiet in the devastated room. There's something you need to hear, Douglas. Something my grandfather wanted you to know. Douglas lifted his head slowly, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Robert. His voice cracked on the name. Robert Hartley. Yes, I said, breaking the seal. My grandfather, your former partner, the man you drove away 30 years ago. And as I unfolded the letter, I watched the last piece of Douglas Harrington's certainty crumble into dust. The envelope felt light in my hands, but the weight of its contents had shaped 25 years of my life. My grandfather was Robert Hartley, I said, looking directly at Douglas. But you knew him. You knew him very well. Douglas's head lifted slowly. Robert, we started Harrington Development together. That was 32 years ago. He left after we had disagreements about how to run the business. Disagreements. I let the word hang there. Grin. Is that what you call it, when your partner discovers you've been bribing building inspectors using substandard materials on the Riverside project to save 15% on construction costs? Evelyn looked up from the floor, shock replacing grief. He left because you compromised everything he believed in, I continued. Because when he confronted you, you told him to either get on board or get out. Douglas's face crumpled. I was trying to save the company. You made criminal choices, I said. And my grandfather walked away rather than be part of it. He gave up everything he'd built because he wouldn't compromise his principles. I unfolded the letter carefully, the paper crackling with age. My grandfather's handwriting, strong, clear, unshakable, filled the page. He wrote this 3 days before he died, I said. And he knew exactly who you were, Douglas. I began to read aloud. Owen, if you're reading this, I'm gone. The money comes from the company I built with Douglas Harrington. I walked away from that partnership, but I never stopped caring about what we'd started. Douglas is brilliant, but flawed. He'll fall again, he always does. When that happens, help him. Not because he deserves it, but because his family does. Save his company if you can. But more importantly, save his soul. Make him learn what I couldn't teach him, that wealth without character is worthless. That power without humility corrupts. That the measure of a man isn't what he owns, but what he does with what he has. Don't do this for revenge. Do it for redemption. His and maybe mine, too. I should have fought harder to keep him on the right path. Be the man I tried to be. Be better than I was. And when you save him, because I believe you will make sure he understands that second chances are gifts, not rights. That grace comes with responsibility. Use this money wisely. And teach Douglas what I failed to teach him, that legacy isn't measured in buildings or bank accounts. It's measured in the lives you touch and the principles you refuse to compromise. With love and faith, Grandpa Robert. The last words came out rough. I'd read this letter hundreds of times, but reading it aloud here now, it hit differently. Douglas was sobbing openly, his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Not manipulation. This was raw grief, the kind that comes when you realize you've wasted decades running from a truth someone tried to teach you. Robert never gave up on you, I said quietly, even after you drove him away. even after you chose money over integrity. He still believed there was something worth saving, and he made me promise to try. I looked at the wreckage around me. Evelyn on the floor, makeup streaked. Quinn staring at her grandfather with horror and heartbreak. Julia gripping my hand like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. I didn't invest in your company by accident, Douglas. I've been fulfilling my grandfather's dying wish for 25 years, saving you from yourself, protecting what he and you built together, waiting for the moment when you'd finally be ready to learn. I placed the letter on the table next to the torn check and fraud documents. Monday's board meeting stands, I said. You'll be removed as CEO. The gambling, the secret sale attempt, the fraud, there's no coming back from that. But you'll be offered a consulting position. 2 days a week. Advisory role. No executive authority. Douglas looked up, hope flickering through devastation. But only if you're willing to learn humility, I continued. If you're willing to admit you don't have all the answers. If you're willing to become the man my grandfather believed you could be. I turned to Julia. She was crying, but when I held out my hand, she took it without hesitation. 21 years of trust. 21 years of choosing each other despite everything. We have a long drive home, I said. She nodded, stood her hand in mine. Behind us, the Harrington family sat amid the ruins of everything they'd believed. Douglas staring at a letter from a man he'd betrayed, but who'd never stopped believing in redemption. Evelyn confronting the reality that her perfect life had been built on lies. Quinn watching the grandfather she'd idolized reveal his feet of clay. And for the first time in 21 years, they finally saw me clearly. Not as the son-in-law who wasn't good enough, but as the man who'd been protecting them all along, as the grandson fulfilling a promise, as someone who understood that power without grace is just cruelty, and that the truest form of strength is knowing when to offer second chances. We walked out together, leaving them to sit with the truth. Tomorrow would bring consequences and difficult conversations, but tonight we went home. The drive back to East Austin was only 10 miles, but it felt like crossing between two different worlds. We walked to the car in silence, the Harrington estate glowing behind us like something from a dream or a nightmare. I couldn't tell anymore. Julia's hand trembled in mine as I opened her door, and I held it for a moment longer than necessary, grounding us both. The first 10 minutes passed without words. I drove through Westlake's perfect streets, past the country club, where Douglas had lectured me about success, past the estates where people measured their worth in acreage and architectural photography. Then onto Loop 360, heading back toward the city. Austin spread out below us as we descended from the hills, a sprawl of lights and possibility, messy and real in ways Westlake would never be. The downtown skyline glowed in the distance. Our city, our home. Finally, Julia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been planning this? I kept my eyes on the road, watching the white lines disappear beneath our wheels. I wasn't planning revenge. The investment came first, years before I met you. The testing... I paused. That was only 14 months. 14 months. She turned toward me. You let them treat you like that. For 21 years, Owen. You sat through their dinners and their comments and their... Her voice broke. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed I married you only for you? I asked quietly. Not for access to your family or their connections or the possibility of joining their world. The question hung between us. I don't know, she admitted finally. Maybe not at first. Maybe I would have wondered. That's why I didn't tell you. I needed you to know, really know, that I chose you when there was nothing to gain. That I stayed when every logical reason said I shouldn't. That I loved you for exactly who you are, not what you came from. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of everything she was processing. Not just tonight. 21 years of choices. 21 years of defending me to her family. 21 years of wondering if maybe they were right, if maybe she'd given up too much. And Quinn. Her voice cracked on our daughter's name. I let your parents poison her against me. I said the admission like swallowing broken glass. I thought patience would teach her real values. I thought watching us build a life based on something other than money would show her what actually matters. I was wrong. Tears came then from both of us. I pulled into a parking lot off Mopac because the road disappeared behind the blur, and sitting there with the engine idling and the city lights swimming through tears, we finally let it out, all of it. 21 years of holding steady against her family's contempt. The exhaustion of always being measured and found wanting. The pain of watching our daughter become exactly what we'd tried to protect her from. What happens now? Julia asked when we could breathe again. The company will survive, I said. Douglas may accept the consulting role or he may walk away. That's his choice. But the gambling stops. The fraud stops. The company gets protected from his worst impulses. And us. I finally turned to face her fully. That's your choice, Julia. I understand if this is too much. If finding out I kept this from you for 21 years, stop. She reached for my hand. I choose you. I chose you 23 years ago at that museum fundraiser when you were wearing a suit you'd bought at Goodwill and didn't care who knew it. I chose you at our wedding when my mother was crying in the bathroom and my father barely spoke to you. I've chosen you every single day since. She squeezed my fingers. The man who shared that tiny apartment with me. The man who made spaghetti on a hot plate and called it a date. The man who never once made me feel like choosing him was choosing less. That's who I love. Not the billionaire. Not the majority shareholder. Just you. Something in my chest that had been locked tight for months finally released. 20 minutes later, we pulled into our driveway on Holly Street. After the Harrington Estates' 4 acres and Spanish colonial grandeur, our house looked small, ordinary, perfect. The porch light we'd installed ourselves. The garden Julia had planted. The paint color we'd debated for weeks before finally choosing. Home. Inside, surrounded by 2 decades of accumulated life books and photos and furniture we'd picked out together, Julia asked the question I'd been expecting. What about the money? I pulled her close. What do you want to do with it? I don't know. It doesn't feel real. It's real. And it's ours. We can start a foundation. Fund scholarships. Help families like the ones in our neighborhood afford to stay as prices rise. Whatever you want. And this house. She looked around our modest living room. We're keeping it? I said firmly. I don't need a mansion in Westlake Hills. I never did. This is home. This is where we built our life. This is where we choose to be. She kissed me then, and it felt like a beginning rather than an ending. Monday would bring consequences. The board meeting, Douglas's removal, Quinn's reckoning with reality, difficult conversations with Evelyn, all of it waiting just beyond tomorrow's sunrise. But tonight in our small house in East Austin, with 21 years of love surrounding us, we were richer than the Harringtons had ever been. Because we still had each other, and that I was finally certain was everything that mattered. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the weight of consequences. The boardroom at Harrington Development occupied the 23rd floor of the Congress Avenue Tower, the one I'd financed 12 years ago when Douglas needed capital for downtown expansion. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but today the view was obscured by clouds that pressed against the glass like witnesses to what was about to unfold. I arrived early, Julian Rhodes met me in the lobby with a leather briefcase containing documentation we'd prepared over the weekend. Stock certificates, ownership records, a legal paper trail that 25 years of careful corporate structure had created. "Ready?" he asked. I wasn't sure I was, but I nodded anyway. The board members arrived in clusters, executives who'd worked under Douglas for years, outside directors who represented institutional investors, the CFO who'd probably suspected something was wrong for months, but hadn't asked questions. They filed in with coffee cups and tablets, professional masks in place. Douglas arrived last. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. The tan had faded to gray. The confident stride had become tentative. He wore a suit that fit perfectly, but somehow looked wrong now, like a costume that no longer matched the character wearing it. Our eyes met across the boardroom. I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Not anger or defiance, but resignation. Maybe even relief. He took the seat at the far end of the table. Not the head anymore, just another participant in the discussion of his own fate. Julian called the meeting to order at exactly 9 o'clock. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for convening on short notice. This emergency session has been called by Owen Hartley, majority shareholder of Harrington Development Group, to address immediate governance concerns." The room shifted. Eyes turned to me. Some board members had clearly done their homework over the weekend. Others were just now realizing what majority shareholder meant. Julian presented the documentation methodically. Incorporation papers for Hartley Holdings. Stock purchase records dating back 25 years. Current ownership structure: Owen Hartley, 47%. Douglas Harrington, 18%. Remaining 35% distributed among institutional and private investors. The numbers told the story cleaner than any speech could. "The agenda," Julian continued, "is a vote on the current CEO position. Mr. Hartley has raised concerns about recent executive decisions that may have exposed the company to significant legal and financial risk." He didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. The board members who needed to know had already received confidential briefings about the Preston Chambers situation, the undisclosed gambling losses, the attempted sale without majority shareholder approval. "Discussion," Julian asked. The CFO spoke first. "I move we vote immediately. The evidence speaks for itself." "Second," said one of the outside directors. No one defended Douglas. No one spoke in his favor. Some faces showed sympathy, but sympathy doesn't change fiduciary duty. This wasn't personal. It was business. And that somehow made it worse. All in favor of removing Douglas Harrington from the position of Chief Executive Officer, hands rose around the table. I counted silently. 14 in favor. Opposed. 4 hands. Loyalty, perhaps. Or just reluctance to participate in ending a career. 78%. More than enough. "The motion carries," Julian said. "Effective immediately, Douglas Harrington is removed from the position of CEO. An interim management team has been selected and will assume leadership tomorrow morning." Not me. I'd made that clear from the beginning. I didn't want to run the company. I wanted to protect it. There was a difference. Douglas stood slowly gathering his tablet and phone with movements that seemed rehearsed, as if he'd been practicing this moment in his mind. He looked around the table once at colleagues who'd worked beside him for years, at the boardroom where he'd made decisions that shaped skylines and neighborhoods. Then he walked out without a word. No dramatic speech, no protest, no breakdown. Just dignity and defeat, which somehow hurt more to watch than anger would have. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt like punctuation. I felt tired. Not victorious or satisfied or even relieved, just exhausted by the weight of what I'd had to do and what it had cost everyone involved. The interim CEO, a woman named Rebecca Marshall, who'd been running operations for 3 years, took the empty seat. "Let's talk about next steps," she said, and the meeting continued with the mundane details of transition plans and communication strategies. But I was thinking about Douglas walking out that door, about the man my grandfather had once called a friend, about whether redemption was really possible, or if I'd just destroyed him while convincing myself I was saving him. The meeting adjourned at 9:15. 11 minutes to end a career. Over the next 2 days, my phone collected 12 voicemails from Quinn. I didn't listen to them. Couldn't not yet. Julia's phone lit up constantly with texts. "Mom, please, I didn't understand. I'm sorry, please talk to me." She didn't respond. Not yet. By Tuesday evening, Quinn had apparently realized that without the Harrington development connection on her resume, without the implicit promise of nepotism and family influence, no one was returning her calls. The marketing firms she'd applied to the positions she'd assumed were hers. For the asking, all went silent. The job market, it seemed, had a way of teaching lessons that 18 years of privilege had obscured. Lessons about merit and value and what you're actually worth when the family name can't carry you. Julia found me on the back porch Tuesday night, looking out over East Austin. "She's learning," Julia said quietly, sitting beside me. "The hard way." "Is there any other way?" I didn't have an answer for that. Somewhere across town, Douglas was learning too, learning what it meant to face consequences, learning that second chances came with conditions, learning perhaps what my grandfather had tried to teach him 30 years ago. And I was learning that power without purpose is just destruction, no matter how justified you think it is. Evelyn called Julia 17 times between Monday and Wednesday. Each call went to voicemail. Each message grew more desperate. I heard fragments when Julia played them back, Tuesday evening, phone clutched in both hands. "Julia, sweetheart, please. Just let me explain." Click. "Baby, I know we hurt you. Please just give me 5 minutes." Click. "Your father won't eat. He just sits staring at Robert Hartley's letter. Please call me back." Click. By Wednesday morning, Julia's resolve had cracked. I found her in the kitchen at 6 a.m., dark circles under her eyes. "I want to be angry," she said. "I want to make them suffer the way they made us suffer for 21 years. But all I can think about is my dad sitting alone and I—" Her voice broke. I pulled her against my shoulder. "You don't have to choose between anger and compassion. You can feel both. Can I?" "Yeah. That's not weakness, Jules. That's being human." She nodded. "I think I need to talk to her, but I'm scared nothing will change." "Then you set the terms. You decide what reconciliation looks like." She wiped her eyes. "Okay, but not yet." That afternoon, a courier arrived at our door. "Delivery for Mrs. Julia Hartley," he said, extending a cream envelope with Evelyn's monogram. I signed for it and set it on the kitchen counter. Heavy cardstock, burgundy wax seal, my name nowhere on it. This was for Julia alone. Julia arrived at 5:30, groceries in both arms, talking about a scholarship recipient. She was smiling until she saw the envelope. The smile died. "That's my mother's stationery." Julia approached carefully. She ran her thumb across the wax seal pressed with Evelyn's family crest. "Do you want privacy?" "No, stay. I need you here." She broke the seal and extracted 3 pages in Evelyn's handwriting. The letters wavered, arthritis making control difficult. Julia read in silence. I watched emotions flicker: anger, grief, surprise, hope. When she finished, she handed me the letter. "My dearest Julia, I'm writing by hand because typed felt too cold. My fingers ache, the doctor says arthritis, but I think it's shame, but I need you to see the effort. I've spent 3 days trying to understand how I became the kind of mother who would hand her son-in-law a check for $275,000 and tell him to leave her daughter. I taught you that love was transactional, that marriage was a contract between families, that your worth came from the man you chose and the life he could provide. When you fell in love with Owen, I saw failure. Not yours, mine. I'd given you every advantage and you chose a logistics analyst who drove a 15-year-old car. I was humiliated. For 21 years I punished you. Every dinner declined. Every cruelty about Owen's clothes or career. Every time I mentioned Preston Chambers. God, I'm sorry about Preston, but you never wavered. You held his hand through every humiliation. You built a life that had more authenticity in 800 square feet than our Westlake estate has in all its 5,000. And I hated you for it. Not consciously, but I hated that you were happy without the things I'd accumulated. I hated that you proved everything I'd built my identity on was hollow. Your father and I have had conversations these past few days that we should have had decades ago. About what we value, about what we've taught Quinn, about the fact that the man we've treated like hired help actually saved Douglas's company and asked nothing except basic respect. Owen's grandfather was right. Douglas needed saving from himself, and I needed saving from the person I'd become, the woman who measured her daughter's worth by her husband's bank account. I'm not asking forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm writing to tell you that I see you now, really see you for the first time since you were a little girl. I see a woman with courage I'll never possess. A woman who chose love over security. A woman launching a foundation that will change lives, while I spent years planning charity galas that were really just excuses to wear expensive dresses. I see you, Julia, and I'm proud. And I'm sorry it took me 21 years and your husband's devastating grace to finally open my eyes. If you're willing, I would like to talk, not to excuse myself, but to begin becoming the mother you deserved. I understand if you're not ready, but I needed you to know that I see what I've done. And I'm committed to becoming different. I love you. I have always loved you. I just had no idea how to show it without conditions. Your mother, P.S. Please don't send money or gifts. If we rebuild this, it will be because we proved through time and consistency that we meant every word. I folded the letter carefully. Julia stood at the counter, tears streaming. She called herself my mother, Julia whispered. Not mother with the capital M, like she's trying to be different. She is trying, I said. Whether she succeeds is another question. Julia wiped her eyes. I want to see them. Not forgive them, not yet. But I want to hear them say this to my face. Then invite them here. Your territory. Your terms. She nodded, pulling out her phone. Her hands shook as she typed. Mom, I got your letter. Thank you. I'm not ready to forgive yet, but I'm willing to talk. Friday night, 7 p.m., our house. Casual clothes, no gifts, no pretense. Just family trying to figure out if we can actually be one. Send it, I said. She hit send. The message showed delivered, then read almost instantly. Finally, we'll be there. Thank you for giving us a chance. I love you. Julia set down her phone, eyes red but clear. Friday. Oh God, what am I doing? Giving them an opportunity to prove they're serious. What if this is a mistake? Then we'll deal with it together. But Jules, I think your mom meant what she wrote. The arthritis detail, the admission about hating you. Those aren't manipulation tactics. You think they can change. I think they're terrified of losing you, and sometimes fear is a better motivator than love. She nodded, then started putting away groceries with shaking hands. I helped her in silence. That night, lying in bed, Julia read the letter 3 more times by phone light. Finally, she curled against me. Owen. Yeah. Thank you for letting me figure this out at my own pace. I kissed her forehead. They're your parents. You get to decide what forgiveness looks like. She was quiet. I think I want them back. Not the old them, but some version that's actually capable of being family. Is that naive? No. That's hope. And hope isn't naive, it's brave. Friday was 3 days away. 3 days to prepare for a conversation that would either begin reconciliation or confirm that some relationships are too damaged to repair. I pulled Julia closer and hoped for all of us that forgiveness was possible. Sometimes it is. They stood at the door, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. Douglas still carried himself with that ex-CEO posture, but something essential had diminished. Evelyn clutched a bouquet of sunflowers and zinnias wrapped in brown paper, the kind you'd buy at the Muller Farmers Market, not from some expensive florist. Julia opened the door. She'd been nervous all afternoon, rearranging furniture twice, changing her shirt 3 times. Now she stood frozen face to face with her mother for the first time since that catastrophic Friday dinner 2 weeks ago. "Mom," Julia said quietly. "Sweetheart." Evelyn's voice cracked. The flowers trembled in her hands. "These are for you." The woman at the market said zinnias represent endurance and lasting affection. Julia took the flowers carefully. "They're beautiful, thank you." Douglas stepped forward, extending his hand. He wore dark jeans and a simple navy sweater, no tie, no blazer. "Owen, thank you for not closing the door." I shook his hand, noting the calluses that hadn't been there before. "You drove the Camry?" "Yeah, sold both Mercedes last week. We wanted to understand what normal feels like." Julia led her mother to the kitchen while Douglas and I moved to the living room. His eyes found the photographs on our walls, Julia and me on our courthouse wedding day, young and broke. Quinn, at various ages, gap-toothed and grinning. No professional portraits, just life captured in snapshots. "You have a nice home," Douglas said. "It feels lived in, loved. 800 square feet. 1 bathroom. But it's ours." The house in Westlake is 5,000 square feet, and I've never felt at home there. It's just a showcase. Julia had insisted on cooking herself, so dinner tonight was spaghetti with homemade marinara, her specialty perfected over 20 years. Garlic bread, simple salad. Douglas pulled a bottle from his canvas bag. "I brought wine. The guy at the Austin wine merchant said it pairs well with Italian food. I accepted the $12 Montepulciano with its handwritten tag, perfect for casual dinners with people you care about." This is great. Thank you." The women emerged, both having cried the quiet release of tension held too long. Julia set the flowers in an old mason jar at the center of our table. The sunflowers blazed bright yellow against worn wood. We arranged ourselves, Julia and me on one side, Douglas and Evelyn on the other. No one at the head, just 4 people attempting something fragile. When we were all served, silence descended. Finally, Douglas cleared his throat. "I need to say something." He set down his fork. "What I did to you both over the past 21 years isn't something a simple apology can fix. But I need you to hear it." He looked directly at me. "Every dinner at our house I made you feel small. Every comment about your job, your clothes, your car, it was designed to diminish you." His voice grew rough. "That check $275,000. I calculated it to be more than 7 years of your salary, so I could throw that number in your face." Julia inhaled sharply. I reached for her hand. "The cruelest part is that you saved my company. Every major expansion, the domain project, the downtown tower, the flood recovery, was funded by your capital. You kept us afloat while I treated you like you were worthless." He paused. You were doing what my father's partner asked, save the company and save me from myself. And I repaid that by trying to humiliate you. Evelyn placed her hand over Douglas's, then turned to Julia. Baby, I failed you. Her voice was barely a whisper. From the time you were young, I taught you that your value came from who you married, where you lived, what people thought. I measured your worth in all the wrong ways. Tears tracked through her makeup. When you fell in love with Owen, I saw it as failure. I spent 21 years mourning the life I thought you deserved, never seeing the life you'd actually chosen. Julia's grip on my hand tightened. I held up Preston Chambers like some standard, but you didn't want a man who could buy you things. You wanted a man with integrity, with patience. She looked at me. You loved my daughter when she had nothing to offer but herself. You built a life on honesty, and I called that failure. And Quinn, Evelyn added, her voice breaking. We poisoned her. Every comment about money and status we taught her, to value all the wrong things. What she said at that dinner, those were our words. Douglas nodded. We raised her to think people like you don't matter. Now she's lost. I accept your apologies, I said quietly. But accepting isn't forgetting. If we rebuild this, it has to be real. No more judgment based on appearances. Yes, Douglas said immediately. Julia, I turned to my wife. This is your decision. You've carried this pain the longest. Julia looked at her parents. I want a relationship with you, but not the old one. I can't apologize for choosing love over status. I can't watch you treat my husband like he's less than human. We don't want that, Evelyn said urgently. We want to know you really know you. I want to learn from you, Owen, Douglas added. How you've built a marriage on honesty, how you've protected people who were hurting you. There's something Christ-like in that. Then we try, Julia said softly. We start small. Dinner every couple weeks here. You come as you are, no performance. Simple food, honest talk. We'll take that, Evelyn said through tears. Douglas raised his glass hand, shaking. To family, not the one we performed for others, but the one we actually are. We clinked glasses. The wine was decent, honest, and unpretentious. The spaghetti had cooled during apologies, but no one cared. We ate slowly, conversation starting and stopping. Evelyn asked about the foundation Julia had mentioned. Douglas talked about his consulting role 2 days a week, mentoring instead of commanding. Rebecca Marshall is brilliant, Douglas said. She's doing things I should have implemented years ago. The evening stretched from 7 to 9, then past 10. Discomfort gradually gave way to something tentative, not quite forgiveness, but the beginning. We washed dishes together, strangely domestic, given the seismic shift happening beneath. When they prepared to leave, Evelyn embraced Julia with a fierceness that spoke of years of withheld affection. I love you. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it without conditions. I know, Mom. We'll figure it out. Douglas pulled me into an awkward hug. Thank you for giving us another chance, for being better than we deserved. After they left, the Camry's taillights disappearing down Holly Street, Julia and I stood on our small porch. Do you think they mean it? Julia asked. I thought about Douglas's calloused hands and Evelyn's farmer's market flowers, about apologies without excuses. I think they're trying, really trying. Julia nodded. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, but maybe it's giving people space to become different. Maybe. We stood watching our quiet street, feeling the weight and possibility settle into something we could carry forward. The hurt wasn't erased, but something had shifted, a door opened, a path cleared, a chance offered and tentatively accepted. Sometimes a beginning is enough. Spring arrived in Austin with the kind of quiet confidence I'd come to associate with lasting change. 3 months had passed since that dinner at the Westlake estate. 3 months that felt simultaneously like a lifetime and no time at all. I stood in the parking lot of Harrington Development's Congress Avenue Tower at 6:30 on a Thursday evening, watching the last sliver of daylight paint the downtown skyline copper and gold. Rebecca Marshall's leadership had transformed the company in ways I hadn't anticipated. The stock had climbed 35% in the first quarter alone, not through aggressive expansion or risky ventures, but through operational excellence and a renewed focus on projects that served actual community needs. The quarterly report on my passenger seat told a story of steady growth, ethical partnerships, and a corporate culture shifting from ego to purpose. Douglas came in 2 days a week, now Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. I'd taken to timing my visits to coincide with his, not to monitor him, but because I'd discovered something unexpected. I actually valued his insights when they weren't wrapped in condescension. This morning I'd watched him sit with 3 young project managers, listening more than talking, asking questions instead of issuing pronouncements. "They're brilliant," he'd told me afterward, his voice carrying a humility I'd never heard before. "That Chen kid designing the affordable housing complex near Muller, he's thinking 20 years ahead. Sustainability, community integration, things I should have been prioritizing decades ago." The Mercedes was gone, sold 3 weeks after the board meeting. Douglas drove a silver Toyota Camry, now practical, anonymous, exactly like thousands of others on Austin roads. He'd told Julia it was about understanding what normal felt like, about remembering that most people navigate the world without luxury as a cushion against consequence. But the most profound change wasn't visible from a parking lot or a boardroom. The Hartley Family Foundation had officially launched in January with a $75 million endowment, roughly 4% of my Harrington holdings, structured through a trust that would ensure sustainable funding for generations. Julia had transitioned from hesitant volunteer to confident director with a speed that both surprised and didn't surprise me. She'd always had this capacity for leadership. She'd simply never had permission to use it. The foundation's mission was precisely targeted scholarships for first-generation college students from working-class families, emergency housing assistance for people facing eviction, and job training programs for adults re-entering the workforce. "These are the kids nobody expects to succeed," Julia had told a gathering of potential donors last month. "The ones working 2 jobs while taking night classes. The single mothers studying for the GRE on the bus. The formerly incarcerated trying to rebuild their lives with zero safety net. These are the people who will change our world if someone just gives them a fighting chance." I'd watched from the back of the room as heads nodded, as checkbooks opened, as Julia transformed wealth into purpose with a clarity that left me breathless. Evelyn had become one of the foundation's most dedicated volunteers. This still shocked me, though I tried not to show it. She came in 15 hours a week, 3 full days, doing work that would have been unthinkable to her 6 months ago. Stuffing envelopes, answering phones, scheduling appointments with families who needed help. Julia had told me about finding her mother in the small kitchen area one afternoon, making coffee for a young woman who'd just received her first scholarship check and was crying too hard to speak. "Mom just held her," Julia had said, her own eyes wet. "Didn't try to fix it or give advice, just held her and let her cry." Something essential had shifted in Evelyn. She'd traded her museum fundraiser galas for foundation orientations. Her country club connections now served to recruit mentors for first-generation students. The woman who'd once measured worth in pedigrees and property now spent her Wednesdays helping families navigate emergency rent assistance paperwork. "I wasted so much time," she'd told me quietly 2 weeks ago when I'd stopped by the foundation office. "Chasing things that didn't matter. Teaching Julia to chase them too." She'd looked up at me, her carefully maintained composure cracking slightly. Thank you for loving her better than we did. The bi-weekly family dinners had become our new normal, Douglas and Evelyn arriving at our East Austin home every other Friday, at 7, staying until 9 or 10, helping with dishes, sometimes lingering on the back porch to watch the neighborhood's transformation unfold. Douglas brought wine from the local shop on East 6th Street, now mid-range bottles chosen because the clerk recommended them. Evelyn brought flowers from the farmer's market. They asked about my work, genuinely interested. They laughed at Julia's terrible puns. They acted, in other words, like family. It wasn't perfect. Evelyn still sometimes caught herself offering unsolicited advice, and Douglas occasionally slipped into CEO mode, but it was real. Awkward and effortful and real. Quinn's absence hung over these dinners like a ghost we all politely ignored. My daughter had written me a letter 6 weeks ago, 3 pages in her careful handwriting, sent to the foundation office because she apparently couldn't bring herself to use our home address. Dad, I'm writing this from a coffee shop in East Austin, not far from your house, actually. Though I'm not ready to knock on your door yet. I've walked past it twice, chickened out both times. I've thought a lot about what I said at that dinner. About you holding Mom back. I was so sure I was right. So confident. I've been working in marketing for a startup for 6 weeks now. Entry-level meaning. I fetch coffee and update spreadsheets and get yelled at when I make mistakes. I live in a studio apartment that costs 60% of my salary. I take the bus. I buy generic brands. I've learned to cook ramen 5 different ways. And you know what's weird? I'm happier than I've ever been. Not because poverty is noble or struggle builds character. I'm happier because I'm building something that's actually mine. Because when my boss praised my work last week, I knew I'd earned it. Grandma and Grandpa told me what you really are, what you've been this whole time. I don't know how to apologize for what I said. Those words showed you exactly who I was becoming, and you were right to call me out. I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I'm just asking you to know that I'm working on becoming someone worthy of it. To love Quinn, I'd shown the letter to Julia, who'd cried, and immediately wanted to invite Quinn to dinner. I gently suggested we wait not as punishment, but because Quinn was doing something important. She was learning to stand on her own. Julia had met with Quinn twice for coffee. Cautious meetings where they talked about the foundation and Quinn's job and the strange beauty of starting over. She asked about you, Julia had said after the second meeting, asked if you hated her. What did you tell her? That you never hated her. That you were just waiting for her to become herself. Standing in the parking lot as dusk settled over Austin, I pulled out my phone and opened the text message I drafted 3 times without sending. Quinn, your mother told me about your job, about your apartment, about the fact that you're building a life that belongs to you. I'm proud of you, not because you're struggling, but because you're learning what it means to create value instead of just claiming it. When you're ready, our door is open. Not because you're forgiven, you don't need my forgiveness, but because you're always welcome. Because you're my daughter and I love you. Take your time. Do the work. Become who you're meant to be. And when you're ready to come home for dinner, just let us know. Dad, I hit send before I could second-guess the message, watched the blue bubble disappear and exhaled slowly. The parking lot had emptied around me. Downtown glowed in the gathering dark. Somewhere in Westlake Hills, Douglas was probably reviewing proposals, learning to serve instead of command. Evelyn was likely planning next week's foundation schedule. And somewhere in a studio apartment not far from here, Quinn was heating up ramen or updating spreadsheets or simply sitting with the uncomfortable reality of starting over. I climbed into my 15-year-old Accord and headed east toward home. Toward Julia and our modest house and the life we'd built on purpose rather than pretense. 3 months ago, I'd walked into that Westlake estate carrying 23 years of secrets. I'd walked out carrying something far more valuable, the certain knowledge of what mattered. Rebecca Marshall would run the company brilliantly. The foundation would touch hundreds of lives through Julia's leadership. Douglas would finish his career as a mentor instead of a tyrant. Evelyn would discover that service brings more satisfaction than status ever could. Quinn would build herself into someone remarkable, and I would go home to the woman who'd chosen me when I had nothing to offer but honesty, cook dinner in our tiny kitchen, and count myself wealthy in all the ways that actually matter. The traffic light at 6th Street turned green. I accelerated through the intersection, heading home, carrying with me the quiet certainty that the greatest victories are the ones that change hearts instead of just circumstances. That wealth means nothing without purpose. That power without humility destroys everything it touches. That family, real family, is built through truth and forgiveness, and the patient work of showing up, choosing love, even when it's complicated. 3 months ago, I was a billionaire pretending to be nobody. Tonight, I was just Owen Hartley, heading home to my wife, grateful for second chances and transformed hearts and the messy, beautiful work of reconciliation. Somewhere ahead, our porch light was on. Julia would be waiting. And that more than anything was enough. Tonight, after another Friday dinner, after Douglas and Evelyn left, with real smiles, Julia and I stood on our small back porch overlooking East Austin. The evening had turned cool, that particular Texas spring temperature, where you could finally breathe. City lights spread out below us, a constellation of lives being lived. The Congress Avenue tower I'd financed caught the last rays of sunset. Julia leaned against the railing, looking out at the neighborhood we'd called home for 2 decades, the coffee shop on the corner, the taco truck that knew our order, the park where we used to take Quinn when she was small. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Regret what? Letting them humiliate you for so long. 21 years of their dinners, their comments, their contempt. You could have stopped it at any time." I thought about those years against this moment. The dinners where Douglas had lectured me while spending my money. The holidays where Evelyn had introduced me with that apologetic tone. "Never," I said finally. "Because now I know. Your parents love you more than their pride. It just took losing you to realize it. You chose me for who I am. And I don't need anyone's permission to be myself." She turned to face me, city lights reflecting in her eyes. "But who are you, Owen Hartley? After all this, who are you really?" "I'm a 51-year-old logistics consultant," I said slowly. "I help small businesses because I like solving puzzles that actually matter. I'm a billionaire investor who learned wealth without purpose is just numbers. I'm your husband, the part I'm proudest of." I pulled her closer, both of us looking out at the city we loved. "And I'm the man who proved that the most powerful people are usually the ones nobody notices, the ones too busy doing the work to announce their presence." She smiled. "You enjoyed it, didn't you? The secret. The knowing." "Not enjoyed exactly. But there was something clarifying about watching people reveal who they really are when they think you're powerless. Seeing what they value when they believe you have nothing they want." "And what did you see?" I thought about Douglas, about the man who'd gambled away millions, about Evelyn who'd built her identity on appearances and was now discovering service, about Quinn learning that respect has to be earned. "That your parents are capable of change when forced to face real consequences," I said. "That Quinn needed to lose everything to figure out who she actually is. That Preston Chambers drew a line when he could have completed that fraud deal." "And me. What did you learn about me?" "That you're stronger than either of us knew. That you chose me every single day for 21 years, even when it cost you your family's approval. That you never once made me feel like marrying you was a mistake." "I didn't," she said softly. I mean. There were moments when I wished things were easier, but I never wished I'd chosen differently." She turned in my arms. "You know what I learned? That the man I married was exactly who I thought he was, someone who valued character over comfort. The money didn't change that. It just proved it. I kissed her, then soft and certain. "What do you think they're doing right now?" she asked. "My parents, I mean." I thought about Douglas in his smaller house, the one they'd moved to after selling the Westlake estate. 3 bedrooms instead of 7. A yard they maintained themselves. Neighbors they actually talked to. "Learning," I said. "Actually learning." Douglas is discovering he's better at teaching than leading. He likes working with young executives, showing them what he learned the hard way. Evelyn's finding out that service is more fulfilling than status. She told me last week she wishes she'd started this 20 years ago. Do you believe her? I do. Because she's not performing anymore. She shows up at the foundation in jeans and actually works. That's not something you fake for 3 months straight. And Quinn. The question still hurt. But time had given me distance. "Quinn's building something real," I said. "It'll take time, but she's figuring out who she is when success has to come from her own hands, instead of her last name." "Do you think she'll ever really apologize?" "Eventually, when she understands what she's apologizing for, not just the words, but the values behind them. The assumption that worth equals wealth." A police siren wailed somewhere to the south. Normal city sounds. "You know what's funny?" Julia said. "My mother stops at the taco truck now. She knows the owner's name. She asks about his kids." I smiled. "Says Evelyn Harrington taco truck regular. Your younger self would never have believed it." We stood as the evening deepened, as city lights grew brighter against the darkening sky. "I chose love," I said quietly. "I chose to believe in second chances even when they weren't deserved yet. I chose honesty over secrecy. And I chose to prove that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage if you use it right." "How do you use it right?" "You don't just win, you win with grace. You show people who they could be, instead of just punishing them. You remember that power without mercy is just cruelty, and that the strongest thing you can do is forgive people who haven't earned it yet." She took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "I'm proud of us," I said. Somewhere Douglas was learning. Somewhere Evelyn was discovering purpose. Somewhere Quinn was earning respect the hard way. And here in the modest house we'd chosen, with 21 years of love surrounding us, we were rich in the only ways that count. Not in what we owned, but in who we'd become. And in knowing that the greatest power isn't in being seen or acknowledged. It's in being underestimated, proving everyone wrong, and still offering grace when you could have chosen cruelty. When nobody expects you to win, victory tastes sweeter. But when you win with love instead of vengeance, that's when you know you've actually won something worth having. If you're living this family story right now, underestimated, dismissed, watching family betrayal unfold at every holiday dinner, don't wait 21 years like I did. God gave me patience, but He also gave me a voice. I silenced mine for too long. The truth is, silence in the face of family betrayal isn't noble. It's a slow poison that seeps into your marriage, your children, your sense of self-worth. Here's what I learned from this family story. First, speak up sooner. Not with arrogance, but with honest boundaries. God honors truth spoken in love even when it's uncomfortable. Second, don't let family betrayal teach your children to measure worth by wealth. Quinn learned our silence meant their values were correct. She's unlearning that now painfully. Third, your partner needs to see you fight for them. Julia needed to see me stand up, not to prove my wealth, but to prove our marriage mattered more than their approval. Fourth, wealth without purpose is just numbers. God didn't bless me financially so I could hide. He blessed me so I could serve, and I wasted years playing small. Finally, reconciliation is possible, but only when everyone commits to truth. We're rebuilding now slowly because character outlasts comfort always. If your family story includes betrayal or years of being made to feel less than, don't become me. Don't wait for a crisis. Live your worth daily. Trust that God sees you even when they don't. Have you faced family betrayal? Share your family story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else today. Subscribe and share this with someone navigating complicated family dynamics. You're not alone.